I want to start with a little story from years ago when my son Will was between 1 and 2 years old. And I took him to visit my parents who live out in the country about 3 hours away. And I love both my kids, but there's some men who are really good with babies. I'm not one of them. If you hand me a baby, I'll say, wow, this is really adorable. What do I do? I don't know. Even with my own kids, I was like, So, my goal with little 1.5-year-old Will was, let's get him to go to sleep. Okay, let's make him tired. So out in the country, there's lots to do. We ran, we chased, we climbed, we threw rocks, we did the things. And he was good and tired. Night fell, and my mom set up this little temporary crib. So here's, the walls of it are taller than his head. So he's going to be in there, right? So I read him a Bible story. I prayed a prayer with him. I laid him in that crib, walked down the hall, sat down with my parents who were watching TV, finally, for the first time all day, relaxed. And like 30 seconds later, my mom points to me and she says, look. And I turn, and right there standing on my right shoulder is my son. He's got this big grin on his face, and he says, "I back." So yeah, that's a famous story in the Berger household. But I tell you that to say this. When you read the book of Acts in the New Testament, it's the story of the beginning of what we call Christianity. And you can read it as a series of barriers, like that crib that we put Will in. And I thought, okay, he's down for the night. He's not getting out of there until I pull him out myself. There are a series of barriers that are placed around, fences, you might say, walls that are placed around the Jesus movement in its early days. And it looks like that's it. It's contained. It's just going to be these people. And then the church climbs over it and says, "I'm back. You can't stop me. I've got the Holy Spirit. I've got the best news that's ever been heard." And so, for instance, the way the story of Acts starts, there's just a few hundred followers of Jesus on the earth, only 120 of them in the city of Jerusalem, and they are scared and they're confused and they're just waiting for a sign from God on what to do. And you would think that that's going to be it, right? Jesus was amazing. Anybody, even a person who didn't believe in him would have said, okay, he was one of one. I've never seen anything like him, but he's gone now. So once the generation of people who believed in him is dead and in the ground, that'll be it. There will be no more talk of this Jesus guy. And then the day of Pentecost happens. And so instead of one person who's walking around God in human flesh, you've got thousands of people who have the Spirit of God inside them, who carry the living God with them wherever they go. And that's a barrier that's been crossed. And not only that, but a language barrier has been crossed, because before you had to speak Hebrew to understand the gospel. Now there are people of every language group in the Mediterranean who know Jesus and can tell you about Jesus if you live in that part of the world. But even then, there was another, even bigger barrier. It was all Jews, just Jewish people. Now, let me just testify that my wife gave me for Father's Day a few years ago one of those DNA test kits, and I sent it off to see what my ancestry was. Guess what? I'm white. This is just basically it. I'm, nothing more interesting than that. I was hoping with a name like Berger that maybe there was some Jewish blood in there, but no, not a drop. And so imagine if Christianity were just restricted to the Jewish people. And for a while, it looked like that's the way it would be, that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. Everybody else, it's none of your business, right? And then one of the Christians, one of the early believers, not even an apostle, a guy named Philip, said, didn't our Lord say that you'll take my word to Jerusalem and then to Judea and then to Samaria? Well, nobody's gone to Samaria, have they? Okay, well, why not me? And he took it upon himself to go to this part of their country where the people who lived there hated Jewish people and Jews hated them back, but he preached the gospel to them, and by droves they were coming to faith. And so in the midst of this great awakening, this great coming to the Lord, God says to Philip, okay, leave this place and go stand on a road in Gaza, which is a long way away in the middle of the desert. And Philip does it. It makes no sense strategically, but he does it. And as he's standing there, along comes this chariot, and this chariot is driven by a black man. So clearly not from around here, not someone who is Jewish or Samaritan. Philip shares the gospel with him. He gets saved. Turns out he is the treasurer of the court of the queen of Ethiopia. He takes the gospel with him down there. To this day, there is a Christian denomination, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, that counts that man as their founder. So again, another huge barrier has been broken. But it's still, at that point, it's still just in Israel, right? There's that one guy, but everybody else could say, yeah, that was just a fluke. God can save anybody he wants, but it's still just in Israel. Just in the geographical area of Israel. And the apostles aren't part of this. So that's where we stand. Today, we're going to look at the biggest barrier yet that the church has to cross. And we'll talk about the two barriers that our church today, the church today, still has to face. Okay? So let's look at this barrier they face in Acts chapter 10, verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. Cornelius stared at him in fear. What is it, Lord? He asked. The angel answered, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. Now, the interesting thing about this is Caesarea is on the coast. It was the Roman capital city of Israel. And you know who else was living in Caesarea at this time? Philip. You know, the guy who preached to the Ethiopian, the guy who preached to the Samaritans. After that encounter in Gaza, he moved to Caesarea. He and his wife had 4 daughters. They were prophetesses themselves. And so he had this whole house full of people that preached the gospel. So you would think, here's this guy Cornelius. By the way, here's the second thing that's interesting. It wasn't unheard of for Romans to start believing in the God of Israel. It was unusual, but not unheard of. Remember, there's a story in the Gospels of a centurion who asked Jesus to come heal his servant who's dying. So here's this guy Cornelius. He's clearly a God seeker. He is obsessed with the God of Israel. And God says, I'm gonna show you even one better than that. I'm gonna introduce you to my son who can save your soul. But why doesn't he say, there's a guy just down the street from you here in Caesarea named Philip, and he's good at this whole thing. He can tell you the truth. You can get saved today. Why instead does he say, send men to some guy 30 miles away in Joppa? Well, the answer to that question is because the apostles still aren't on board with this whole evangelizing the Gentiles thing yet. The apostles are still thinking, this is about us Jews. Gentiles need not apply. They have to get the apostles on board. And the way they do that is through Peter. But Peter has to be prepped, okay? And so that's what comes next. God has to prepare Peter for this paradigm shift in his thinking. So verse 9 says, about noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. Surely not, Lord, Peter replied. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. The voice spoke to him a second time. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. So the Jews practiced a law called kosher. It was their dietary law. It restricted what they ate. It was one of the ways they knew they were separate from the rest of the nations on earth. And Orthodox Jews still practice this today. In fact, if you go to Jerusalem, city of Jerusalem, you literally cannot get a cheeseburger in that city of millions, because the kosher law says you can't mix dairy and meat. You get a pizza, it can have cheese, but not meat. You see, it's this law still exists. Now, what God is saying to Peter is, it's time to throw that away. It's time to set that aside. I know it came from Moses, but you need to set it aside. Why? Because it's become a point of division. It's become a barrier to the gospel. If you as a Jew can't eat certain meats, if you can't eat certain foods that are favored by the Gentiles, and I want you to win those people to the Lord, you're going to say, well, I can't go to that person's house. I can't sit down at a table with them because I might become unclean. And God says, it's time to set all that aside. By the way, Jesus told them this years earlier. You look up Mark chapter 7:19. Jesus said, all foods are now clean. The law of kosher was set for a certain period of time to separate the people from the nations, but now it needs to go away because, as God says, nothing that I have made clean shall be called unclean. Now listen, we all have our little boundary markers, don't we? We all have our ways of feeling superior to others. If you're a person who keeps your yard nice and clean and trims and mows every week and you weed your flower beds and you mulch and you get yard of the month 3 or 4 times a year, and your next door neighbor mows maybe once every 6 weeks, that's a point of separation between you two, right? Because you look down on them. You may not say anything snobby, but you're like, okay, I'm better. And that's what the law of kosher had become for the Jews. It had become a way of feeling superior, a way of separating themselves. And God said it's time for it to go away. And so when Peter wakes up, he realizes, here's what God's saying. God's saying, I need to be open to the fact that he's doing things I never thought he would do. He's reaching people that I never thought he would reach. A barrier has just been crossed. So Peter follows these men to Caesarea. Cornelius has gathered his entire family, all of his servants, into his house. Peter shows up. And he's got to be the most uncomfortable man on earth. He's never been in the home of a Gentile before. All he knows to do is what God told him to do. So he tells the story of Jesus and his death on the cross, his resurrection, and the gospel like he's preached before. And to his amazement and surprise, everyone in the house gets saved that day. And it's obvious because they begin to show the same signs that the disciples showed on the day of Pentecost to show that God has come into their life and changed them. Then he has to go back to Jerusalem and explain himself to the other apostles, who at first are very furious with him. How dare you bring these unclean Gentiles into our family? They have no business worshiping our Messiah. And Peter says, well, let me tell you what happened in Caesarea. And they literally say, well, I guess God can do what he wants. If God wants to save the Gentiles, I guess that's going to have to be okay with us. I guess that's the thing now. And again, as a Gentile, I'm so glad. And not just because I love bacon and I love shrimp and I love catfish. And in the second service, when I said the word bacon, a lady went, woohoo! I mean, literally, it was exciting to her that these laws don't restrict us anymore. But far more important is that Jesus is for me and for you, not just for the people that he was born into. That barrier is gone. However, I have a little secret for you. It took the church a long time to really get that message. Because years later, Paul and Barnabas decide, hey, let's go take this good news all around the area that we call Europe today, so Greece and Turkey and all those areas, and they're preaching the gospel, they're planting churches, and the Christians in Jerusalem throw a fit, and they say, how can you do this? You're going to wipe out our identity. You're bringing people into the faith who've never been circumcised, who don't follow the law of Moses, who don't offer sacrifices. You need to make them Jews first, and then they can believe in Jesus. And they have this big conference in Jerusalem. This is Acts 15, where Peter's the one who basically carries the day and says, listen, I told you the story of me and Cornelius years ago. God can do what he wants. And fortunately, they decide you don't have to become Jewish first. You can be saved just as you are. And then years later, even Peter backslides. He's visiting the church in Antioch, Paul's home base, and he decides, I think I'm just going to hang out with my Jewish friends instead of my Gentile fellow believers. And Paul calls him out in front of everyone and says, you of all people should know that none of us can live up to the law. All we need is Jesus. So this is a barrier that keeps coming up, and the church, God keeps finding a way to get over it so that the gospel will not be inhibited. And again, as a Gentile, I'm so thankful, and you should be too. But what about today? You see, here's the thing I believe. Because we live in a sin-cursed world, there will always be barriers to the church doing what we're called to do. There will always be difficulties. There will always be things we have to get beyond. And I can think of 2 barriers that we face in the world today. I'm going to tell you those 2 and what we ought to do about them, and then we're done. So one of the barriers is outside of us. It's in our neighbors. The other one is inside of us. The one that's in our neighbors is what I call a spiritual barrier. The spiritual barrier is, it's summed up in just saying, they're not interested in what we have to say. They don't want to know what we have to offer them. They've lost that hunger to know the truth. See, I talk to people who are my age and older who can testify that things used to be a little different in this country. Not perfect. We have a way of seeing the past through rose-colored glasses, but definitely the church was more influential. Christianity was more a part of culture than it is today, and certainly more people were coming to faith in those days. I'm talking from the mid-40s to at least the end of the 70s. And so people in that, when we're talking and they're my age or older, they'll say, what we need is another Billy Graham. Now, if you're not familiar with that name, or if you've heard the name but you don't know about him, let me just tell you just a little bit about this guy. Billy Graham was a preacher who preached during that time from the mid-40s, and actually he passed away in the 21st century. But he was a guy who could fill a stadium like Taylor Swift. I mean, a preacher who would stand in a stadium and it would be packed with people, and then they would play Just As I Am, and people would flood the aisles to come forward and give their heart to Jesus. This is a guy who would be invited onto national talk shows. See, what young people don't realize is it used to be that there was one late night talk show everybody watched. So if you stayed up past the news, you'd watch Johnny Carson, and he'd have a movie star on, and he'd have a famous musician, and then Billy Graham would show up once in a while, and he'd ask him questions, and Billy Graham would answer from the Bible. This is on a talk show that went out to the entire country. This guy was so famous, if you wanted to write him a letter, all you had to do was just address the envelope by saying, Billy Graham, Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's it. The post office knew where he was. They'd take it to him. He even got a letter once where a person got confused and wrote, Billy Graham, many apples, many sodas. And it got delivered. This is a guy who had a personal relationship with every president from Harry Truman to Barack Obama. That's how many presidents said, I need to get this guy's prayers. I need to get this guy's wisdom. I need to hear from him and him hear from me and have his support. And it wasn't just him. If you're familiar with groups like Campus Crusade, now called Cru, or Navigators, or Fellowship of Christian Athletes, all these ministries were started during that period of time. And I got news for you. I love Billy Graham. He's one of my heroes. But it's not that he was an exceptional preacher. If you just read the text of his sermons or even watch old video, you're like, okay, it's pretty basic stuff. The difference was he was the man for his time. This was a time, that period of our nation's history was a time in which there was a hunger for truth combined with a consensus idea that the Bible is true. I mean, even most unbelievers thought, well, I'm not a Christian, but yeah, the Bible is probably where the answers are. I may not understand it, I may not live it, but yeah, if I wanted to, that's where I'd find the answers. That was the basic consensus of our country. And someone like Graham or these other groups would stand up and say, you don't have to understand it all. You don't have to follow it perfectly. You just have to believe that Jesus did it for you, and you're in. And people were so excited to find that out. Today, if you share that same message, in the same way Billy Graham and thousands of others did, there's a different response. It's as though back then they were farmers who had ground that had plentiful rain and fertile soil, and all of a sudden we've been through a drought. And it's so much harder to get a harvest than it used to be. What we need today is not another Billy Graham. If Billy Graham was alive again today, he wouldn't fill up stadiums, and he wouldn't be invited onto talk shows, and presidents wouldn't want to go visit him because the culture has changed. There's a spiritual barrier now between us and our lost neighbors. And I know there are signs of change. There are signs of hopefulness. Our friends in the UK talk about a quiet revival over there that's very exciting, where these ancient churches that used to just have a handful of gray-haired folks, now young people are coming to church there, not in great numbers, but it's turning around. In our own country, Generation Z, these people here in the front few rows, they're more likely to go to church and learn about Jesus and be open to the gospel than their parents' generation was, which is good news. But still, and you look at guys like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or the atheist Richard Dawkins, people who aren't Christians, but who will publicly say Christianity is a good thing. We need more of it. It's good for society. And yet none of those things have changed the fact that with each successive year, every poll that they take shows there are fewer and fewer people coming to Christ. So what do we do about that? There's literally no strategy. There's no $1 million campaign that's going to turn that around. That is a spiritual barrier that only the Holy Spirit of God can break through. And we need to be praying for that. Now that's out there. What about us? What about the barrier in us? This is what I call a cultural barrier. Because ironically, around the same time the ground that we were trying to plant in got hard, we started changing the way we looked at people who weren't in the church. Maybe not consciously, but it took time because we started fighting all these battles over political and social issues, and it came to the point where we started seeing our unsaved friends and neighbors not as neighbors to be won, but as enemies to be conquered. We saw our goal in the world not as a mission to spread the gospel, but as a war to reclaim our culture. We stopped seeing ourselves as citizens of heaven who were just down here for a little while as ambassadors, and instead acting like this world is our home and these other people are the unwanted invaders. And I'll illustrate it this way. If you can imagine just your average Christian family, and they've got a home next door to them that's empty, but all of a sudden one day they notice a new family is moving in. And of course, they're looking through the window shades and they're seeing what this family looks like. And maybe they notice that based on the way that they dress, that they're of a different faith. Or maybe they notice based on their bumper stickers and the sign they've already stuck out in their yard that they believe some stuff socially, politically that we don't believe. Now, how do you respond to that if you're the average Christian family? Do you respond with anger? Do you get online and say, "Don't California my Texas"? I moved here to get away from people like you. Do you respond with fear? Do you sit there and say to your spouse, "How are we going to make sure that our kids don't get influenced by them?" Do you respond with defiance and say, "Okay, we need to come up with some signs that will offend them really good, or let's find the slightest little infraction that they commit and report it to the HOA so they'll get harassed, and let's play gospel music full blast at 5 a.m. and whatever we have to do to annoy them so they'll leave"? Or do you say, "Lord, I'm amazed that you trust me enough to put me next door to some people who clearly need you. And I know that I'm not up to the task, so I'm asking you to help me and grant me wisdom, and grant me courage and humility, the ability to see them through your eyes. Just help me, oh Lord, to do my part, to bring them to you. Thank you for this opportunity." See, I'm afraid when the world looks at us, when our non-Christian neighbors think about us, they see anger, they see fear, they see defiance. They don't see the love of Christ. They don't see what the world saw in the early church. Those first Christians, what did they do? They were a minority, unlike us. There's enough of us in this country, we feel like we've got our people, right? But the early Christians, that first group, they were a tiny minority. How did they turn things around? 4 things, real quick. Number 1, they prayed fervently. That same prayer that I just shared with you. Lord, show us how to reach them. Lord, soften their hearts so they will be receptive when they see the gospel in me. They prayed fervently. Number 2, they lived among their unbelieving neighbors with uncompromising integrity. There was a very specific pagan sexual ethic and social ethic and way of doing things in the Greco-Roman world. Christianity was nothing like that. They refused to compromise. They weren't arrogant about it. They didn't go on protest marches against Roman ethics and morality. They just lived with integrity. And their neighbors thought they were weird, and yet there was something compelling about it. Number 3, they loved their neighbors in practical ways. There are so many stories about this, but maybe the most spectacular is that Christians were well known for the fact that when these big epidemics would hit major cities, everybody would flee. Everybody who was able-bodied would get out of town to get away from the contagion because they didn't know how to stay safe. Everybody, that is, except the Christians. The Christians would stay behind and they would tend to their sick and they'd tend to the sick of the pagans as well. And some of them would get sick and some of them would die. And they'd say, "Oh, well, I guess I get to go to heaven earlier." And the Greeks and the Romans would say, "What's with these people? Why do they love us this way when we give them nothing but abuse?" And then the 4th thing, they spoke the truth about Christ in ways that their neighbors could understand. If you ever do a study of the messages of the Apostle Paul. When he goes to preach the gospel in a new city. There's so many different times this story is told in the book of Acts. If he's talking to fellow Jews, he's quoting the scriptures. He's showing them that the prophets foretold that Jesus would come, that Jesus would die, that Jesus would rise again. But when he's talking to Gentiles, he's not quoting the Old Testament. He's not talking about prophets. Why? Because that means nothing to them. He's speaking the gospel in words they can understand, that they can identify with. He's, in his own words from 1 Corinthians, he is all things to all people so that by all possible means he might win some. And that's how the world turned around. Those four things. What I'm asking you to do today, what I'm asking you to do is to pray and say, Lord, we're facing barriers right now. The gospel's not spreading like it has in times past. So soften the hearts of my neighbors and help me to love them like you love them and show me how to reach them. That's what needs to happen. That's what will happen when revival hits. There's a great story about these two little Jewish boys, Maurice and Joseph Jaffo. Maurice was 12, Joseph was 10. They were French Jews in the 1940s. Germany had conquered France. There was a tiny little free area of France in the south, and so most Jewish French people got out of town. They fled to free France as quickly as they could. But Maurice and Joseph's parents couldn't afford to leave. So they scraped together all their money, and they made the heartbreaking decision to send their boys ahead of them. They said, we'll try to get to you later, but if you can get to free France, our relatives live there, you'll find them, you'll be safe. So imagine being 12 and 10 years old, and you and your sibling getting on a train and going someplace you've never been. And they came to the end of the line, and they still weren't across the border. And they had to pay somebody who took a lot of their money to get them across the border into free France. And once they were there, it was almost nighttime, so they found a barn, just an empty barn, and they bedded down for the night there. But in the middle of the night, little Joseph woke up, the 10-year-old, and he noticed that his brother wasn't there, and he was very scared. So he turned on his flashlight, and he noticed there was a note sitting right there on the ground beside him, and it said, "Don't worry, I'll be back." That's all it said. And with the faith of a 10-year-old, he just went back to sleep. When he woke up in the morning, the barn was full of people. And he found his brother. He goes, "Who are all these people?" He said, "Well, I figured now that I know the way through, I should get others across too." And so he'd spent the entire night going back and forth across the border, finding people and saying, "No, I'll take you for free. I'll show you where we crossed. Here's how you get there." Is there a better analogy for what we're called to do? Because we've found the way. We have found the way, not because we're smart, not because we're worthy, because of the grace of God, we have found the way, the truth, and the life. How can we not share that with someone else? And I know there's all kinds of things that make it hard to share your faith, and I'm not asking you to become suddenly this dynamo. I am asking you to pray, Lord, give me a heart for the lost like your heart for the lost. Lord, change the heart of my church, change the heart of the church so that we will love our neighbors like we should. Because that's what it's going to take. Because someday Jesus is coming back. Someday Jesus is going to step back onto the world stage and he's going to say, "I'm back." And you're going to want to be standing there and saying, "Lord, I'm saved by your grace, but let me introduce you to the people I've brought with me." How much better will it be to not go before him empty-handed,